Did you know that companies with a structured onboarding process improve retention by up to 82%? That's 82%. By having a structured onboarding process instead of just a free-for-all, let Johnny over here train you. A strong training plan isn't just about getting employees up to speed, it's about setting them up for long-term success. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a tailored training plan that will improve employee productivity right out of the gate, as well as set them up for long-term success and integrating them into your company culture. Whether you're a small business owner who's responsible for all the training in your organization, or you're an L&D professional in a learning organization, or you have just been given some new responsibilities to create some technical training in your company, this video is for you, and this channel is for you. This channel is all about learning and development, all things helping employees be successful in the workplace and how they learn as effectively as possible. So let's get into this video on how to create a training plan for your new employees. Let me tell you what I'm going to tell you in the training. So first off, we're going to talk a little bit about why a training plan is so essential, as if that 82% I said in the intro wasn't enough. We'll talk more about that. And then I'll talk about, secondly, the key components of an effective training plan. And then, maybe most importantly, a step-by-step guide to how you can build an effective training plan. I'll talk a little bit about some best practices and also some common pitfalls to success. And then we'll summarize it all and set you off to creating your own training plan. So let's get to it. Welcome, I'm Mary, and I'm so glad to have you here. I've worked with companies for over 30 years in their learning and development functions, either as the leader of the learning organization or in a technical learning organization, as well as a consultant helping other companies be successful as well. So first, let's talk about why a training plan is essential for your new employees. And I'm saying new employees, but really this would also impact any employees who are in a new role, and really any employees in general. You should have a training plan, but mostly I'm focusing this video on new employees and the importance of setting them up for success out of the gate. So some of the reasons why a training plan is so essential is, one, employee productivity and retention. You know, if you have proper training at the very beginning, then you're setting your employees up for success. And if they're getting the information they need in a way that they can digest it quickly and apply it effectively, then their productivity is going to be increased exponentially out of the gate. They're also going to retain more if it's structured in such a way where they can actually digest the information. That's what you want, right? You want people to get up to speed as quickly as possible, and you want them to retain the information that they get. I'll talk about pitfalls later, but one of the biggest mistakes I see companies make is trying to give too much information to the new hire. They're so eager to make sure that the new hire has everything they possibly need to know that there's no possible way that that person can retain it all. And they're getting bombarded with this information from every direction. So they're just overwhelmed, and they're going to retain maybe a fourth of what they get out of that, out of all that content that they're being provided. So stay tuned. Let's make sure that doesn't happen in your organization. The other reason you want to make sure you have an effective training plan is you're going to have a decreased time to competency. If you structure your training and your training plan in such a way that people can actually learn information and then build on that information, they're going to end up being more competent more quickly than if you just give them a data dump of everything they could ever possibly need to know. Another reason that's often overlooked as to why you want to have a structured training plan for all new employees is to make sure that you're integrating brand alignment and your culture that you want that person to have. A structured training is not only going to give them the skills that they need to be successful in their role, it's going to also help them to understand the cultural norms and values that your company has. They're going to be able to understand that from the very beginning because you're going to create a plan that includes all of that for them. You know, it's just as important for your new employees to understand the vision and the goals of the organization as it is to know how to do their job. That way, they can not only be employees for you, they can be ambassadors for your organization. And that's ultimately what you want. Let's move into the 6 key components of an effective training plan design. First and foremost, you're going to have a clear objective regarding what the expected outcome is of your training plan. So is that, whether it's one employee that you're training or hundreds of employees, you want to make sure that that training plan that you have for that position, maybe it's all your customer service agents, or maybe it's just one person that you're training, but you should have, I always think in terms of 3, you should think of 3 things that you want this person to be able to do, or the expected outcomes that you have of this particular training plan that you're building. So always think about that. There's a lot that goes into creating clear objectives, and I'm not covering that in this video. However, I have created an entire another video on how to write good objectives, and I'll put a link to that down below, as well as at the end of this video if you want to check that out. The second component in your training plan is realistic timelines and milestones that you want them to get through. So realistic is the key word here. Just because you need them to get up to speed really fast doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea to put a 2-week timeline on something that should take 60 days. You have to think from the perspective of your new employee. There's a lot of things that they're thinking about when they're starting a new job. There's a lot of things that they're learning. They're not just learning the content that you're giving them, they're also learning your organization. They're learning people's names. They're learning where the bathroom is and when they get paid and what the benefits package is going to be. So they're learning lots of things. So when you think of realistic timelines of success for those objectives and the milestones for what you would see them be able to do to know that they were getting it, then you want to make sure that those are realistic timelines with all the other things that that person has on their plate. The third component that you want to include in a training plan design is their role-specific training. So a lot of the training is going to be about your organization and how things are handled in your company and some of the processes in your company. But there's also going to be role-specific training, and you want to make sure that you tailor that training to the employee's role while You want to make sure you tailor that training to the employee's role while incorporating essential company information and standards and practices that you want them to have. So think about that as a package in that role-specific training. The fourth component that you want to consider when creating a training plan is what learning methods or tools do you have at your disposal? So will there be in-person live training sessions, especially if you're hiring a lot of people into a certain role? Will there be e-learning modules? And if so, how will you get those created? Do you have people who can create that for you? Will there be a mentor that can mentor them along the way, or job shadowing component to the training plan? Or will they have a self-study or a practice session that they need to have? So those are just some learning methods and tools, or will you combine all of those methodologies and tools? That's one component you need to think about when thinking of your training plan. You know, let me give you an example of this. I was creating a training plan for a company who was doing a bunch of hiring in India. Well, obviously, we couldn't use in-person training for this because we didn't have any people in India who could perform the training. So that eliminated that particular learning method for this situation. However, if you're in a situation where you have people on site, it might be it might be preferable to have in-person training and have labs and opportunities for them to ask questions. So think about what learning methods and tools that you have available at your disposal within your organization or that you could get access to. I want to tell a little story here to put this in perspective. Years ago, decades ago actually, I took a job at an organization and I was really excited to start this job. I already had experience in the type of skills that were needed for the job. However, I was new to the company and to the industry. And so what they did, the way that they designed my particular training, other than the company welcome to the company situation, they gave me an entire bookshelf of these, I don't know, 2.5-inch wide binders and told me I needed to read them. It was horrible. It was the most horrible thing that I could have ever had to experience. I wanted so bad to be successful in this role. I was excited about it, but I could not stay awake by noon every day after reading for hours. I just couldn't do it. I mean, it was the most awful experience ever. So when you're thinking about your learning methods and tools, think about how that's going to be for the learner, and if you want them to do uh, 6 weeks of reading manuals, they're probably not going to be very excited about that. That's not going to be the most effective way for them to learn. Some people may enjoy reading manuals all day. Most people don't. And especially if you're hiring people that you want to be productive. So if these are people you want to be action oriented, they're not going to have a very good time reading manuals all day. So think about your learning methods and tools and what you can actually do.
Okay,
Okay,
number
number
five
five
component is
component.
a feedback mechanism. This is so often missed in training programs, and it's such a needed aspect of all training programs. So there's lots of ways that you can give feedback. And first, let me talk about why this is so important. So a feedback mechanism, if I take a training course and I'm practicing or I'm learning how to do something, if I have no feedback, how do I know that I'm doing it correctly? And also, how do I know that I'm doing it to your satisfaction? Maybe I'm doing it okay, but maybe you would like it to be better. If there's no feedback built into your training plan, then there's no way for the employee to know how they're doing as they're going through it. There's lots of ways that you can put automated feedback into a training program, things like having assessments or knowledge checks where they can check their knowledge, because that is a form of feedback, but there's literally nothing better than human feedback, where somebody can correct them if they're doing it incorrectly and be able to show them how to do something or tell them, yeah, that's how you do that. Yeah, that's good. I like that. You did that right. There's nothing better than that. So think about ways that you're going to incorporate a feedback loop, especially in the absence of in-person training.
And then the last component that you want to consider is assessments or evaluations. And that is you can do a skill assessment where you have them actually demonstrate how to do something. It could be a project that you give them and the completion of that project. It could be knowledge checks or a way to assess their skills and their knowledge. So there's lots of ways that you can do that. Often overlooked for assessment and evaluation, but also important, more anecdotal in nature, is conversations. Just sitting down and having a conversation with them and asking them questions on what they're learning and how they're assimilating things together to see if they're grasping the information you want them to have in order to do their job effectively. So those are the components that are necessary for an effective training plan. Now let's move into your step-by-step guide into creating a training plan.
Okay, step one is you're going to want to identify the training needs. And if it's a large group that you're doing this for, and also please check out the video that I mentioned previously on training needs analysis I'll have a link down below as well. But you want to identify the training needs. And if you're doing this as a company-wide, maybe you're part of an organization, then get some of the department heads together and make sure that everybody's in alignment with what they want people to walk away from this training plan knowing and doing. And be sure to make it realistic, because they're all going to have their own ideas of what people ought to know, and you'll need to facilitate that dialogue to make sure that everybody's on the same page with the realistic timelines of how much time you get to show them those things. So identify the needs, make sure you know what the expected outcomes are of the training plan, and because you're going to build everything to that. So I recently created a training plan for engineers. And what we started with was, what are the 3 things that you want these engineers to know when they come out of their technical training program? What should they be able to do that they weren't able to do when they started? And limit to 3 things. That's the hardest part, is limiting to 3 things. So it's like the 3 big rocks. What are the 3 big rocks that if they can do these things, you also know that they learned all these other smaller things underneath those 3 big rocks, and they're able to do that as well. Step number 2 is to develop the content and materials. This can take months. It generally takes way longer than what people think it's going to take, and there are all kinds of data available on ATD, I think is what they're still called, or it used to be ASTD. I think it's ATD now. ATD has data out there on how long it takes to design training. It's always longer than what the business thinks it should be, but you want to make sure you start, now that you have your objectives and you know what the needs are, it's time to develop the content. And of course, I can't tell you how to develop the content in this video. I'll have lots of other videos about how to develop different kinds of content. Some of it you might be able to source from other places. Maybe you don't need to design it, or maybe it already exists. Some of it might be documentation. Some of it you might want to create some videos, or you might want to plan how you're going to deliver it based on what we talked about in the last section. But you want to just start building that content up. Okay, the next step in your plan is going to be to design the training schedule. So whatever that schedule is. Now, maybe you're going through a hiring surge, and if that's the case, then you're going to have a schedule of how often the training needs to happen. If you have in-person training, that schedule can get more difficult, especially if you have different facilitators teaching different topics, so you're going to need to build out that whole training schedule. How many people are going to be hired by when, and who's going to teach which sessions, and are they going to be full, and how do you make them full, and all of that. You can handle a lot of these things through an LMS, a learning management system. And if you don't have a learning management system, drop me a comment down below, and I'll be happy to recommend some for small businesses or whatever size that you have. There's lots of them out there, and that'll really help with the training schedule and assigning the trainers to that schedule. Actually, I would really love to know what LMSs you guys are using. So if you're watching this and you're part of an L&D org, drop me a comment down below and let me know what LMS you're currently using, because I'm curious about what people are using these days. Okay, step number 4 is you want to assign your trainers or your mentors. I want to talk a little bit about this. I could do a video on every one of these topics, which I probably will at some point, but basically you want to assign trainers or mentors based on the skills that those trainers or mentors have and the people you are hiring. You want to make sure that you assign the right people to help with mentoring others. Now, some people call this a training buddy, or it might be the person on their team that's going to show them the ropes. But think not only about their expertise, but also their ability to train and their overall attitude. because your new person is going to learn everything from them. And too often, companies always just pick the most knowledgeable person and they say, okay, you're the most knowledgeable. I want you to do the training. But that person ends up being a terrible trainer. They're impatient. They're easily frustrated. Maybe they don't even like training and they feel like it's just an added task to their day. They would much rather be working. So there are people who are good at training others, and there are people who are really good at doing their job. And they aren't always the same person. Sometimes they are, oftentimes they aren't. So you want to find someone who's not only really good at what they do, but also has a passion for helping others be successful. That's really what you want to look for. Do they enjoy helping others be successful, or are they more interested in doing their job? Because that's going to make a big difference on how things go for your new employee. And then when I talk about attitude, you may have the best employee, productive employee in the world, but maybe they've got a really bad attitude and you put up with it because they're really good at what they do. Well, that isn't the person that you want training your new employee, because your new employee is going to learn everything from them, everything. Okay, this is a great time. I know you've all, whether you're in an L&D role or you're in a management role or whatever role you're in, I know you've all had people train you that were bad or good. I would love to hear about your experience of a good mentor or trainer or a bad mentor or trainer in the comments. Let's talk about it. Okay, step number 5 is to implement the training program. And that's when you actually launch the program and make sure that your new hire or new hirers have the necessary support to complete their program. So not just launching it, it's not just a launch and you walk away. You want to make sure that you're getting feedback from that employee that's letting you know how things are going, in the program. Is it working for them? Because we can design the most beautiful program, but it may not work for the people who are doing it. Maybe we've just overlooked something critical, about what they need to succeed.
And that takes me to step number 6, which is to monitor and adjust. If you look at the analysis or metrics video, I have a video on metrics and on measuring training. I'll put a link to that down below too. But you want to monitor the program and adjust accordingly. The engineering program that I spoke to previously, I launched that program. We had to do it really quick and we launched it. And we were iterating that program every week for months based on feedback that we were getting from those employees who were taking the training. So make sure that you're closely monitoring and you're making it safe for them to give you feedback that may not be positive, that will help you to improve the program for all future employees who need to do this or who need to go through this training. Over time, you're going to learn, you can't take all feedback, like just because Johnny said you should change this one thing doesn't mean you should change it, but you should collect all that feedback and look at it holistically. And if you're getting lots of people saying, yeah, this part's a problem, then that tells you, okay, I might need to rework that a little bit, or I might need to change the program, tweak the program here a little bit. So you want to always be monitoring and adjusting the program. And even once it's stabilized and you have launched it, you still want to come back to it annually at least, or every 6 months, and review that feedback and make sure that something hasn't changed that needs to be modified to make it better.
So those are your steps to create your training program. Now let's talk about just a few best practices to make sure that your training program is as good as it can be. First of all, if at all possible, you want to personalize training programs to individual learning styles and experience levels. So ideally, if you have the opportunity, you don't want your person with no experience necessarily taking the same training as somebody with 10 years experience. If you can personalize the programs and allow them to adapt the training plan to their personal knowledge and skills, then that is like primo best thing possible. So it might be a pre-test that you give them to kind of see where they are, and then customizing or tailoring the training to meet their individual needs. Or it might be some sort of like different programs for different levels of expertise. But the more you can personalize it, that's a great best practice to think of. Can't always make that happen, but it's always great when you can. The next thing that is a best practice is consistency and making sure that you have some sort of uniformity in the delivery of training across the different departments and roles. So that might be how things are packaged or where people access their training. Like, are they getting their training from a Google Drive or are they going to an LMS? Any places that you can put consistency in. After every training program, there's always a knowledge check, then the more consistency, the better. Then your employees begin to learn how to adapt and what to expect with all of their training programs.
Another best practice is to make sure that you have lots of engagement. This video is not about training design, and I think of engagement in terms of the design of the training product that you're creating. However, anytime that you can find ways to engage new employees while they're going through their training program, the better. And engagement can be everything from, some people think engagement is an e-learning course and I had to click next, and that is engagement. That's not engagement. That's like an action. I suppose that's the bare bones bottom of engagement. You want people to engage with your content differently. And there's lots of ways to engage with content. It might be a practice session. It might be that you show them how to do something and then you say, now it's your turn, go create something, and then submit it here. It might be, engagement might be an in-person training or a mentoring session that they have throughout where there's actual interaction and conversation. It might be an opportunity it might be an opportunity to complete lab exercises that they have. There's lots of ways to create engagement. Just remember back to my story of having to read manuals for weeks. Zero engagement, in that. And so it was boring and it was putting me to sleep. You don't want your employees going to sleep when they're first starting working for the company. So the more that you can engage them in the training process, the better.
And then the last best practice is to make sure that you have some sort of strategy for continuous improvement. Like I mentioned before with the monitoring and making edits along the way, you want to always be checking back and having ways to gauge on what you can do to improve the training along the way and make it better. That's just a good rule of thumb for any training that you're creating. Okay, lastly, before I summarize everything, let's talk about some of the pitfalls to avoid because I want to make sure that you are set up for success. The first pitfall to avoid is giving people too much information. I've talked about that a couple of times, but man, I can't say it enough. Trying to dump everything that they could ever possibly need to know in their first week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks is not helping you or them. I know you think you have a captive audience, and so it's important to give them everything, but they are not going to retain it. And not only are they not going to retain it, they're going to feel overloaded and overwhelmed. And you don't want your new employees feeling overwhelmed. You want them to feel like they're getting chunks of information in a timely manner, and they're able to build on the previous chunk and continue to improve. You want them to feel set up for success. And if they feel overloaded and overwhelmed, they don't feel set up for success. Another common pitfall is a lack of support. And that is not having a good training buddy or the person who's helping them along the way, not having a good mentor who's available to them or who is good at delivering training, or even their manager not being available or checking in and seeing how they're doing. Your person who's learning may learn differently than the last person. So they may learn more effectively by reading, for example, and maybe your last person learned by doing, or maybe you prefer to learn by doing, and maybe they prefer to learn by watching first. So make sure that you're providing support and you're checking in with them along the way. The last pitfall really is not following up. And that's kind of what I was talking about with a manager not following up with them. By not following up with them to see how they're doing, you don't know if they're getting it or not. And there's lots of ways to follow up, and it needs to be a little bit more than, hey, how's the training going? It should be conversations. Tell me about this course that you took. What'd you get out of this? What'd you like most out of this training course? How do you think you're going to apply that in your work here? It's conversations, where you actually ask them questions and engage their mind. That follow-up is so critical to their success. And another piece of follow-up, and this is a pitfall as well, is not having some sort of continuous development strategy in place to help build on what they're learning at that beginning time. How are you going to maintain it? How are you going to make sure that they continue to grow and contribute in the organization in a meaningful way? Okay, that was a lot of information. I hope it's helpful to helping you create a training plan for your new employees. As mentioned, I gave you some key components, provided you some specific tips on how to create a training plan. If you've got questions that I did not answer in this video, I really hope you'll put them in the comments down below. If you like the video, of course, please like and subscribe. It really helps me to build an audience, and I will see you in the next video.